media, wipe balance check for the media crews. Mic check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 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 Everyone good? Thank you very much. We'll do one more in about 15 minutes. Thank you. 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's going to be the best Facebook photo of the day. Hijinks at the EPA. Wow, what did you find out about microplastics?
Ladies and gentlemen, if you can start getting your seats, we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you.
Deputy Chief of Staff and Senior Counselor to the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. We're here today to announce a historic set of actions from EPA and HHS to confront one of the most pervasive and least understood environmental health challenges we face, microplastics. For the first time, EPA is elevating microplastics as well as pharmaceuticals as priority contaminants in our nation's drinking water framework, and HHS, through ARPA-H, is launching STOMP, a first-of-its-kind national effort to measure, understand, and ultimately remove microplastics from the human body. Thanks to President Trump's leadership, today's announcement marks a major step forward in this administration's commitment to make America healthy again. This roundtable brings together leading scientists and federal leaders to build on that announcement, to examine what we know, what we don't, and what it will take to turn today's commitment into real progress for the American people. We are especially focused on bridging science and action, ensuring that the research we advance translates into tools, standards, and solutions that protect families, inform clinicians, and guide policy. We are joined today by HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr., EPA Administrator Lee Zeldin, ARPA-H Director Dr. Alicia Jackson, and EPA Assistant Administrator for the Office of Water, Jessica Kramer. And we also welcome today our panelists, Colleen Flaherty. She is a Division Director of EPA's Office of Water, where she leads work to protect public health and safeguard the nation's water resources. Also, Dr. Marcus Erickson, an environmental scientist and co-founder of 5 Gyres Institute, known for pioneering research on microplastics and ocean pollution. Dr. Matthew Campen is a biomedical scientist and professor at University of New Mexico who studies how pollutants, including microplastics, affect the brain and cardiovascular system. Dr. Leo Tresandi is a physician scientist and professor at NYU Langone Health, whose work focuses on environmental exposures and their impact on child health and long-term outcomes. Thank you all for being here and for the work you are doing to advance the field at a very critical moment. And now it's my pleasure to introduce a man who has spent more than 4 decades working at the intersection of environmental protection and public health, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Today, we mark a turning point. The EPA and HHS are acting together to confront microplastics as a human health threat, and we are doing it with urgency and discipline. Plastic has become embedded in modern life. It's also become embedded in the human body. Researchers have detected microplastics in human blood, lung tissue, liver, kidneys, and human placentas. Studies have found them in more than 80% of people tested. One analysis estimates that the average person ingests tens of thousands of microplastic particles each year through food, water, and air. Another study reports concentrations in the brain equivalent by mass to roughly a spoonful of plastic in every human brain. And this number, by the way, has gone up by 50% since 2016. And inevitably, it's going to go up exponentially if we continue along the same road. And in a study of 62 placentas, every single sample contained microplastics, evidence that exposure begins before birth. This is not a rare exposure. This is baseline. We are not dealing with a distant or theoretical risk. We are dealing with a measurable and growing presence inside the human body. And the signal is getting stronger. Animal studies show that microplastic exposure can drive inflammation, cardiovascular damage, impaired cognition, and tumor growth. Human data raises parallel concerns. Diseased tissue consistently shows higher concentrations of microplastics than when compared to healthy tissue. In one major clinical study, patients with microplastics detected in arterial plaque faced a 4.5-fold higher risk of heart attack, stroke, or death in less than 3 years. That's a 450% elevated risk. We do not ignore signals like that. We investigate them. But we still do not have clear answers about causation or solutions. We cannot reliably quantify total microplastic burden in individuals, and we can't distinguish which particle sizes, shapes, components, or polymers drive the worst toxicity. We do not yet understand how these particles interact with the immune system, the endocrine system, or the neurological system. And we do not have validated methods to remove them safely. Not all microplastics behave the same. Different materials accumulate in different organs and appear to drive different biological effects. Without that distinction, there is no roadmap for action. We can't treat what we cannot measure. We cannot regulate what we don't understand. So today, HHS, through ARPA-H, Alicia Jackson here, alongside EPA, is taking direct action. We are launching STOMP, which stands for Systematic Targeting of Microplastics. It's a $144 million national program to measure, understand, and to remove microplastics from the human body. We are focusing on 3 questions: what is in the body, what's causing the harm, and how do we remove it? And we're answering them in that order. We will first build and standardize gold-grade tools capable of detecting and quantifying microplastics across tissue and fluids with precision. Next, we will map how microplastics move through the body, how they cross biological barriers like the gut lining, the blood-brain barrier, where they accumulate, and how long they persist. Third, we will develop targeted, clinically safe strategies to reduce microplastic burden in the body. We will also prioritize those at the greatest risk: pregnant women whose exposure reaches the developing fetus, children whose bodies and brains are still in formation, workers in high exposure environments, and patients with chronic conditions that may be exacerbated by inflammatory or toxic stressors. The science has not kept pace with the scale of exposure. We are now going to close that gap. We are bringing together engineers, clinicians, toxicologists, and data scientists. We are setting measurable targets. We are holding ourselves accountable for results. I want to thank Alicia Jackson, the director of ARPA-H, for driving this effort forward, and my colleague and friend, Administrator Lee Zeldin at EPA, the Assistant Administrator for Office of Water, Jessica Kramer, and everyone else at the EPA for aligning environmental and human health priorities into a single mission. Together, we're going to define the risk, build the tools, and act on the evidence regarding microplastics. We're not going to speculate, we're going to measure. We're not going to delay, we are going to move. And thanks to the leadership of President Trump, we will give the American people clear answers about what's in their bodies and what it means for their health. This is how we're going to make America healthy again. Thank you, and I'm now honored to introduce my colleague, my friend, Administrator Lee Zeldin at EPA.
Well, thank you, Secretary Kennedy, and welcome back to EPA. This room is filled up not just with a lot of great, dedicated staffers here at EPA, but others from outside of government, as well as HHS. And I'm sure everyone here is extremely grateful for your leadership and all of your work. As a New Yorker, I've seen so many different ways that you've impacted the place where I grew up, that was home, born and raised. And this isn't a mission that you started 14 months ago. It was a mission that you started decades ago, and grateful for your passion. Thankful for the entire team at HHS for being here and being part of this momentous day for drinking water in the United States. And shortly after his swearing in last year, President Trump created the Make America Healthy Again Commission, chaired by Secretary Kennedy. Under the leadership of Secretary Kennedy, it's been an honor to serve as part of this significant initiative that has brought together so many different agencies to collaborate. And that's one of the things that we've seen from President Trump time and again. I've experienced it with the National Energy Dominance Council as well. You have these different agencies that were siloed off in the past. They're just focused on their own equities, in their own worlds. They're not coordinating. They're not cooperating. And as a result, you end up with a less efficient government. But the culture that we have inside this administration is for maximum amount of collaboration, and that is why we're here today. And we're taking major steps in today's announcement to make America healthy again. I'm pleased to announce a landmark set of actions by EPA to safeguard the nation's drinking water from microplastics, pharmaceuticals, forever chemicals, and dozens of other contaminants. At the heart of these actions is our draft 6th contaminant candidate list, known as CCL6, which we are releasing today for public comment. CCL6 is a critical tool under the Safe Drinking Water Act that drives research, funding, and future regulation of emerging threats in public water systems. The draft CCL6 includes 4 contaminant groups: microplastics, pharmaceuticals, PFAS, and disinfection byproducts. It also covers 75 chemicals and 9 microbes that may be found in drinking water. And now, for the first time in the program's history, EPA is designating both microplastics and pharmaceuticals as priority contaminant groups. This is a direct response to the concern of millions of Americans who have long demanded answers about what they and their families are drinking every day. It's also a credit to the tireless efforts, research, and advocacy of the dozens of microplastics and drinking water experts, including many who we have here in the room today. This draft CCL6 is going to help us prioritize funding, research, and information collection. This will allow us to better understand the potential risks of these substances in drinking water while advancing gold standard science. For too long, Americans have been ignored as they sound the alarm about plastics in their drinking water. That ends today. By placing microplastics on the contaminant candidate list for the first time ever, EPA will follow the science, will pursue answers, and will hold ourselves to the highest standards to protect the health of Americans. Today's announcement marks the beginning of a 60-day public comment period, and we encourage Americans far and wide to make their voice heard and to give us feedback. We want your input. I can't think of an issue that hits closer to home for American families than the safety of their drinking water. And I want to be clear, this is just the first step in the regulatory process. The human health benchmarks for pharmaceuticals are not regulations, are not enforceable on their own, but they are a vital resource that can empower local decision makers to evaluate risks and protect their communities when pharmaceutical contamination is detected above safe levels. Today's actions represent a major step forward for drinking water. We are ensuring that the science catches up with the real-world challenges Americans face, and we are giving regulators the tools they need to act. This is a win for every American. With this effort, the Trump EPA is advancing gold standard science to inform policy and ensure the best possible outcomes so parents can feel confident filling their children's glasses at the kitchen sink. I want to thank you all again for your unrelenting commitment to making America healthy again and to the safety of our nation's drinking water. And now I will turn it over to Jessica. Jessica Kramer is our Assistant Administrator of our Office of Water here at EPA. She has an amazing team of dedicated career staffers at our Office of Water here at EPA. And I'd also like to recognize our excellent Deputy Administrator here at EPA who's sitting in our front row, David Fatui. Jessica.
Thank you, sir. Microplastics is a growing concern and a challenging contaminant to measure and assess in drinking water. But it's a concern that we are tackling head-on to protect Americans. EPA and the federal family are poised to address this issue and the CCL6, as well as our drinking water research efforts, as important steps that EPA is taking, as the administrator talked about today. We are in the early stages of research on methods to detect microplastics and how microplastics affect people's health, but we are committed to providing answers and actions for Americans who want to ensure their families can turn on their tap and know that their drinking water is safe. Additionally, as the administrator mentioned, we are releasing human health benchmarks for 374 pharmaceuticals, including antibiotics, antidepressants, hormones, and other drugs that enter the water. These include prescribed and over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. The current draft list includes pharmaceuticals that are both approved by the FDA for human use and are known to, or have the potential to, occur in drinking water sources like the Potomac here in DC, or in treated drinking water that is delivered to our homes. Again, these are not regulations, but they give states, tribes, and local water systems a critical new tool to assess risk and take action to protect their communities. For example, if a pharmaceutical occurs in drinking water at levels higher than the benchmark, a water system could conduct additional water monitoring or research to help ensure the health of their community. In addition to those benchmarks that we are releasing for public comment, with the CCL6 that the administrator mentioned, we believe that these are excellent steps and a great example of the federal family working together as we pair these with the announcements of Secretary Kennedy from HHS today. Our actions today represent a major step forward in drinking water, ensuring that the science catches up with the real-world challenges that the administrator mentioned. And we genuinely believe this is a win for every American as the Trump EPA commits to advancing gold standard science, utilizing radical transparency, and protecting our nation from the harms of toxic chemicals. Thank you so much for joining us for these exciting announcements today.
Thank you, Secretary Kennedy and Administrator Zeldin, for your leadership. My name is Alicia Jackson. I lead ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health. Today, we are launching STOMP, and we couldn't be starting soon enough. STOMP stands for Systematic Targeting of Microplastics. It is a nationwide $144 million program built to affordably and precisely measure microplastics in the human body, understand how they cause harm, and most importantly, to get them out at a cost that every American can have access to so that they can have the immediate and downstream health benefits. Here is the hard truth. Nobody wants unknown particles building up in their body or their children's body. If a doctor told you something was accumulated in your organs, your first questions would be, which ones and what are they doing? These questions have no answer yet. We do not have a map for how microplastics travel through the body, which organs and cell types they target, and which biological pathways they disrupt. You cannot engineer a solution to a mechanism you do not understand. You cannot remove what you cannot measure. Today that changes. STOMP will do in 5 years what the entire field has been unable to do for decades. We will create a definitive shared scientific foundation, gold standard measurement, mechanistic understanding, and ultimately targeted removal, and put it in the hands of everyone who needs it. STOMP is structured across 3 technical areas because the science demands it. First, we measure. We will build gold standard methods for detecting and quantifying microplastics across blood, tissue, and organs. For the first time, the entire field will work from the same foundation, and we will put those tools in the hands of every researcher, clinician, and regulator who needs them. We will also build a clinical test under 15 minutes and under $50, because the ability to measure your own microplastic burden should not depend on what you can afford. At the same time, we will address the mechanism of microplastics. We will map how microplastics move through the body, which ones accumulate where, and which pose the greatest risk. The result is the first evidence-based ranking of plastic materials by biological harm. This will create a shared foundation for scientists, policymakers, and industry. And lastly, we remove. STOMP will develop targeted interventions to limit accumulation and clear what's already there, precisely and safely, built on everything that the first phase reveals. Every tool that STOMP builds, from the affordable clinical test to the openly shared measurement standards, is designed for access, not for exclusivity. That is how you protect national health, and it is how you lower the downstream costs that microplastic-related disease will otherwise impose on our healthcare system. This program is built for every American, for the pregnant mother and her child, for the farm worker, the factory worker, for the patient managing a chronic disease, for everyone who is carrying a burden that we cannot yet fully measure. This field has been working in the dark long enough, and STOMP turns on the lights. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Colleen Flaherty, the Director of the Drinking Water Science and Engineering Division here at EPA's Office of Water. Microplastics is a serious and challenging environmental and public health issue. Microplastics can vary greatly in size and composition. There are many different types of plastic polymers that may degrade and get into our water. These plastic polymers can also carry other chemicals, as well as pathogens like bacteria and viruses. Measuring these complex mixtures of microplastics in drinking water and understanding their potential health effects is very, very challenging. Including microplastics on the CCL6 is a great step to further prioritizing research in this area, and we have a lot of work to do. We are working here at EPA to understand two key things. First, how to measure the amount of microplastics in drinking water, and second, how those microplastics may harm human health. Each of these is critical to understanding whether microplastics are found frequently and at levels of health concern in drinking water. First, we need to conduct research to define and better understand how to detect and quantify microplastics, the size, the different types, the shapes, and the number in drinking water. We need reliable, consistent detection methods that can be widely used. Scientists in my division, with the help of experts across EPA and with our other federal partners, are beginning to work to develop a method for detecting microplastics in drinking water. Developing a robust, validated method that can be used broadly will be very challenging work, but EPA scientists are highly skilled and dedicated to this task. Second, we need to understand the range of potential health effects of microplastics and which of those effects occur at the lowest levels. We are working across EPA and with our federal partners, including HHS and others, to explore what we know about health effects of microplastics, including figuring out the types and sizes of microplastics that can lead to different types of health effects. Once we have the ability to measure microplastics in drinking water and an understanding of the potential health effects, then we can assess the potential risks and determine whether it is found frequently and at levels of health concern. We're in the early stages of this research, and we look forward to ramping up our work in this area and working with federal partners to ensure a consistent whole-of-government approach. I'm also proud that scientists in my division, working with FDA, USDA, and the Department of Interior, have developed human health benchmarks for nearly 400 pharmaceuticals. The benchmarks were developed for FDA-approved prescription and over-the-counter drugs that are known to or have the potential to occur in drinking water sources like reservoirs and rivers or treated drinking water. In the future, we may update the existing benchmarks and add benchmarks for other pharmaceuticals as new information becomes available, including as FDA drug labels change. As Jess said, those benchmark values are informational only and are not regulations. To develop the benchmarks, we used the lowest oral therapeutic dose from FDA-approved labels with a safety margin to account for variability among people and for missing information. And then we considered how much water a person typically drinks every day. We developed 2 benchmarks for each pharmaceutical, one for the general population, all ages of people, and one for infants because they may be more sensitive to the exposure. These benchmarks are currently in draft form and are open for public comment along with the CCL6. We have an amazing scientific and research staff here at EPA and across the federal family, and I'm honored to have worked with them over my 22-year career here at EPA. The microplastics research and human health benchmarks for pharmaceuticals are just a slice of what our scientists do. I'm so proud of the work we've done in these areas and on so many other activities to protect public health and ensure our drinking water is safe. Thank you.
Colleen, just a shameless plug for your staff. I got to say, and this applies to so many other people who work here at EPA, but Colleen, that team in the Office of Water, you have people who spend 20, 30, 40 years in government. They're here to selflessly serve. They have the ability to leave government and make, I don't know if the secret's about to get out, but they can make more money outside. But they believe in this mission and they care about America's water. And I've got a chance to see it now for the last 14 months, Colleen, and a message to your entire team that I feel compelled to share with this group publicly. Because Americans don't know where each and every last tax dollar goes. As a matter of fact, I'd say Americans have a lot more questions and answers. It's a mystery. Where does our money go? Well, I will tell you that at EPA's Office of Water, that you have just a tremendous amount of talent, experience, passion, and dedication. So I felt compelled to share that, Colleen. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Administrator.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcus Erickson. I'm the co-founder of the Five Gyres Institute, studying ocean plastics on a global scale for about 20 years. There should be an image coming up. Is it there? Okay, so what you're looking at is a map of the world, and that's a published image that we showed, showcasing that we have found microplastics in the global ocean. And our estimate, published 3 years ago, was 170 trillion microplastics particles worldwide adrift. But I want to show you the graph next to it shows in the last 15 years this exponential rise in the abundance of microplastics. And what the trend we're observing, it's a 40-year trend that we watched, is it was pretty much steady state until around 2005, 2010. Then this exponential rise, it's fragmenting. It's getting smaller and smaller. Everywhere we look, we're seeing smaller and smaller microplastic particles. From the macro litter you might see around the world to the micro as it shreds. And now what we're doing here is looking at the impact. We're trying to monitor impact, look at the impacts of the nanoscale. Next slide, please. So as it gets smaller, and when we say small, I have some images here to show you what that means. When we say a nanoplastic particle, think of something 1/100th the width of a human hair. Really tiny stuff, and even smaller. At that scale, it gets very difficult to monitor and identify what those things are, but I want to point out that the abundance really increases. It skyrockets. Now I would estimate that there are more nanoplastics among us than there are grains of sand on the beach or stars in the sky combined. And we're really awash in these small particles. And I brought our Petri dish put out here. If we left this out here all day long, by the end of the day, there might be hundreds, if not thousands, of nanoplastic or nanoparticulates that are settling into that dish. You touch anything as if, like this synthetic textile, and there's 100 right there. So they are among us, they are abundant. But we need to really understand that the data gap is, how do we measure this? How do we, and then once you measure it, you have to measure it first, and then you understand what is the impact, what is it doing in our bodies. Now, at that scale, that's when we see, research is showing from my colleagues here, is that it enters our body through inhalation, through ingestion, even through dermal transfer. So that's where we are now. Next image, please. So after a lifetime of studying microplastics, after 20 years of that, microplastics in our oceans, it's the ocean of nanoplastics in our bodies that concerns me the most. To measure first, to monitor and mitigate what you cannot see, that's the challenge before us. And that's where I really want to acknowledge STOMP, ARPA-H, EPA, HHS, and the leadership of Secretary Kennedy and Administrator Zeldin for taking this on and bringing this issue to the forefront and putting some teeth behind the research. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Matthew Campen. I'm a professor at the University of New Mexico College of Pharmacy. I also want to convey that same gratitude and thanks to Secretary Kennedy and Administrator Zeldin for their decisive leadership, bringing this initiative to the table. Talking with Dr. Erickson earlier, you know, he's part of a vanguard of ocean scientists who've been looking at the ocean for the past 20 years and you know, asking, is anybody else seeing this? Shouldn't we be worried about this? And you know, 15 years later, health scientists like myself come in and we start scratching the surface and we're like, oh, okay, maybe we should have been listening to you. So this initiative and the STOMP initiative led by ARPA-H is more than timely, and the aggressive nature, the comprehensive nature of this new, you know, it's just going to catalyze so much good science that's going to advance our understanding of these materials, how they degrade, how they travel through the environment, how they ultimately get into our body. And once we understand how they are inhaled, ingested, absorbed, distributed from our stomach to our brain or our placenta, then we'll have the knowledge we need to start intervening and moving those back out of the body. There have been numerous studies that have come out over the past 5 to 10 years, creating alarm for sure, but awareness that there may be a number of diseases that are worsened by micro and nanoplastics. There's still a tremendous uncertainty because of the issues Dr. Erickson raised about how we measure these and how we assess this in humans and their exposures. But there's issues related to cardiovascular disease potentially. 2 years ago, there was a New England Journal study that showed there is 4.5-fold increased risk of having a subsequent heart attack over the next 3 years if you have detectable levels of microplastics in your blood vessels. Well, if you put that in perspective, that's far more risk than any benefit you'll ever get from cholesterol-lowering drugs like statins. That's a tremendous amount of increased risk of a heart attack. We need to better understand if that's really a causal relationship. So studies in controlled exposure systems in the laboratory have started to corroborate a lot of that information, and it does seem like these plastics have a potential to drive cardiovascular disease, as well as neurological diseases, as well as potentially cancer, as well as potentially maternal fetal health outcomes, and ultimately we're now seeing studies related to male fertility. So many potential issues. Right now, we don't have enough information to say that there's truly a threat, but with the exponential increase in these materials and the delay from when plastics are created and used to what could be generations of humans before they degrade and become micro and nanoplastics, we need to have information now so that we can move forward with thoughtful approaches to protecting human health. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Leo Trisande. I'm a pediatrician and direct the NYU Grossman School of Medicine Center for the Investigation of Environmental Hazards. Make no mistake about it, plastics represent an urgent and multidimensional threat to human health. You've heard a lot about micro and nanoplastics today, but that's part of a broader multidimensional problem. because there are also chemicals used in plastic materials and chemicals that are added inadvertently to plastic materials that are likely being trafficked to human tissues as a result of plastic exposure ultimately. What we know about these chemicals, particularly the few chemicals we know about, there are 16,000 chemicals in plastic. We know nothing about 10,000, and we know so much about a small number of chemicals that tells us frightening details. That's particularly about bisphenols used in aluminum can linings and thermal paper receipts, phthalates used in food packaging, flame retardants, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, nonstick cooking, and oil and water resistant clothing, not to mention dioxins that arise out of burning plastic in the process of getting rid of plastic ultimately, that are real problems. These are codified as human health threats by independent scientific entities such as the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the World Health Organization, and United Nations Environment Program, just to name a few. And the impacts run from cradle to grave and womb to tomb. That's because these chemicals hack our hormones, our natural signaling molecules that underlie so many basic biological functions to humankind, from temperature to metabolism, salt, sugar, and even sex. We're talking about growth restriction in utero. We're talking about prematurity, 8% of prematurity globally that can be traced just to one chemical that we know about, phthalates in particular. We're talking about obesogens, chemicals that literally make us fatter, at least 50 or so that we know about to date. Contribution to adult cardiovascular disease is quite substantial. We're talking about 50,000 deaths in the United States, $24 billion in lost economic productivity annually as a result of ongoing exposure. And the healthcare costs are particularly real. Just on the few chemicals that we know about, the United States healthcare cost contribution of plastic exposure right now is $250 billion. 1.2% of our gross domestic product goes out the window as a result of toxic exposures that derive from plastic. And yet we have so much to do. We need to better understand in an integrated way plastic exposure, chemicals together with micro and nanoplastics. We need to take a broader perspective. We need to get better at measuring these exposures because we're probably underestimating the scope of the problem. As an epidemiologist, I'll tell you that exposure and precision often biases your results the wrong way, not finding what you need to find, ultimately. So we need to measure and we need to intervene. As a practicing pediatrician, I'll tell you that we know that there are safe and simple steps that we can all take right now to start to address the problem. Not microwaving, machine dishwashing plastic, consuming less canned food, using more glass and stainless steel, just to name a few. Measuring PFAS in serum, because there are steps that the National Academy of Sciences has outlined for intervention based on clinical testing. But we need to get in the right lane when we see a visible problem before us in the form of micro and nanoplastics. And that information will ultimately guide the end game in terms of prevention, finding safer materials for our generations to come. So I'm especially privileged to be here to support this important STOMP initiative, to import the leadership efforts by Secretary Kennedy and Administrator Zeldin to address water contamination as well through the CCL process. And I'm honored to be part of this important initiative that will take important steps towards making America healthy again. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I just want to say special thanks to Marcus, Matthew, and Leo for joining us today. That was very insightful. Secretary Kennedy or Administrator Zeldin, do you have any questions for our panelists?
I have a question that I'd like to hear answers from Alicia Jackson and maybe Dr. Camden and Dr. Chassan. Many people might be watching this, many Americans, and respond by saying, we already know so much about plastics. We know there's a spoonful in each of our brains. We know that it impacts the prematurity of premature births. It has dramatic impacts on heart attacks, on cardiovascular disease, and strokes. Why do we need to know anything more? Why is this science critical before we act? Or can we be acting now? Shouldn't we be acting right now without even needing to know anything more?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the question. I feel exactly the same way when I learned about the scale and depth of the challenges with microplastics in our health, and especially for my children. It's such a large problem and so broad that if we were just a stop right now, we wouldn't even know where to begin. We simply don't know the specific microplastics that are going to each part of our body. So whether that's polypropylene, polyethylene, polyvinyl chloride, PET, there's so many different types of microplastics of different size and scale. They go to different parts of our body, from the brain to even the mitochondria. And the fastest route we have is to understand which of those microplastics are causing the most harm and focus on those as number one, focus the most resources on those, and that's exactly what we're starting with here.
I agree, Secretary Kennedy. Action now can be taken based on the knowledge we have. It's a complicated problem because we have, you have to address production, recycling, and you have to address waste management. There's so many aspects that will need to be revisited in light of the knowledge we have. But to Director Jackson's point, we need the knowledge now to protect human health, because all of those actions from a big public environmental health policy standpoint will take a long, long time to turn that corner. And it could be 30, 40 years before we start to realize change that's relevant. And I brought these because we're talking about how microplastics are something we think about but don't visualize. These are real ocean macroplastics that come from the Pacific garbage patch, and I'll pass those down if people want to see those. And what we do is grind them, pulverize them down to this. These are real microplastics, less than 20 micrometer, even nanoplastics in here. This is the kind of material that we can learn a lot from in terms of how it distributes through the human body, and get to Director Jackson's point about which microplastics are most likely to be problematic. And that can help us change policy and management around which materials are used in the marketplace.
Secretary Kennedy, thank you for the question. I feel as though we're in a similar moment to roughly in the 1970s, where EPA took leadership steps in getting lead out of gasoline. And at that time, we didn't have perfect causal effects linking exposure to outcome. But we had the courage to act. And Sir Austin Bradford Hill, who described the criteria for causality, made it very clear that the urgency of the action means you weigh the evidence before you at the time and you make a decision. And we have so much evidence to act now and so much more work to do at the same time. Our evidence and understanding of lead exposure has evolved over the 50 years that have followed. We'll do the same thing over the years to come with micro and nanoplastics. And think about, from the sustainable chemistry perspective, the valuable information we can provide for the future of folks who should rightly profit over making products that are safe in people's lives. I think that's a real hope that we can offer for the next generation. Thank you.
Well said. I would invite any of the members of our panel to jump in on this, and Colleen, if you have any thoughts, feel free to share as well. We also added pharmaceuticals onto the candidate list of contaminants, and if any of our panelists have any thoughts, any insight, we have some great experts here on the panel. I would welcome you to share any of it now.
Sure, I'd be happy to start. Pharmaceuticals in the environment is something I've been thinking about for a long time. I actually did my graduate work in that many years ago. So I think it's really interesting because they're chemicals that are designed to be biologically active, and they can get into the water in a number of different ways, through excretion, through the human body, as well as through flushing or other disposal mechanisms. And so they find their way into water bodies at very, very low levels. And it's been sort of a research question for a while now, trying to understand what those exposure to very low levels of pharmaceuticals means in terms of human health impacts. So today's release of the human health benchmarks for pharmaceuticals is incredibly important because it's the first time we're finally giving a screening level benchmark for hundreds of pharmaceuticals. So the way we develop those benchmarks, we believe that if you are measuring for those pharmaceuticals in your water and they're below that level, you should be reasonably confident that there is not a problem. And that should provide a lot of reassurance to utilities and states and others across the country. That's a really important informational tool that we are providing today. There's a lot more work to do, and we're gearing up for it with your support. I think it's exciting that we're including it on CCL6. It means we're prioritizing that for additional research. And if we start to find, that there are pharmaceuticals, that are occurring in systems at a frequency of concern and above, levels that we think is a health concern, then we have tools under the Safe Drinking Water Act to address those risks.
I think if I can add one thing, it would be, we've talked a lot of folks that I talk to about questions about what's in their drinking water. The next question is, how do you get to regulation? I talk a lot about the time and prescriptive nature that's built into the Safe Drinking Water Act. And while our HHS colleagues have been up here talking a lot about investigating where it accumulates in the body and what does that mean for health, one of the things that's important about the listing on the candidate contaminant list for both of these groups is that you have to have the same level of investigation, of research that goes into methodology development for detecting microplastics and pharmaceuticals, as well as removal technologies when we're talking about drinking water systems. And so that is the type of research that we're talking about being spurred. That is the type of spotlight that we are putting on these groups by listing them on the contaminant candidate list. It's the same needs, just focused in a different space.
Secretary Kennedy, did you have another question? Did you have?
I can just briefly add the antimicrobial resistance is altogether real, and we do receive chemical body burden as a result of many of the contaminants that are being addressed through the CCL. So I just simply would applaud those efforts. Thank you.
Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here today. Thank you, Administrator Zeldin and Secretary Kennedy, for your leadership, and President Trump for the Make America Healthy Again agenda. And I'm grateful everyone was here today. And thank you to our panelists and everyone else